Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We're excited to have you here. Today, we are going to be talking about Mind the Gaps, why partial backup means total risk. Yeah, so this is a very critical topic, especially for Microsoft 365 users. Now, many people assume Microsoft automatically protects all their data in M365, like emails, Exchange, Teams chat, SharePoint files, OneDrive documents, and so on. So, the reality is Microsoft ensures availability of the service, but the responsibility for protecting your business data rests with you. And that's where the gaps and the risk comes in. In this session, you can expect to walk away with this key insight, and that is the risk of partial or no backup at all. So, from accidental deletions happening to ransomware, you can also expect to know how Veeam Data Cloud for M365 closes those gaps with reliable backup, fast recovery, and strong security. You should also hope to get practical steps to simplify backup and keep your business data always available. So, before we go further, speaking to you today is Queen Odili. Yes, so this is me. I'm your host for today, and I'm the Product Marketing Associate here at Ha-Shem. To mention a bit about Ha-Shem Limited, we're an IT solutions that company that has spent the last 21 years and counting, building and offering solutions that are simply sorry, okay, yeah, my screen is moving. Building solutions and offerings that are simply customer centered and result driven. Since then, it has been a journey of growth, purpose, and commitment to offering integrity and trust in our solutions. So, because we understand that data is the backbone of every business, so, because we understand that data is the backbone of every business and tech should be meaningful and meet you exactly where you need it to help you and your business move forward, we have partnered with Veeam Software. So, Veeam is trusted by organizations worldwide because it ensures that no matter what happens, be it accidental deletions, cyber attacks, system failures, or even outages, your data remains backed up, recoverable, and available when you need it most. So, through our partnership with Veeam, we help organizations go beyond data storage to ensure that business continuity and peace of mind you have that. So that is why speaking to you today on this topic is Mark Governor. So Mark is a senior systems engineer at Veeam Software with almost 2 decades of experience in IT infrastructure. So over the years, he has played a key role in guiding businesses on backup and replications. He has been able to combine both a strategic perspective and hands-on technical expertise, which makes him the perfect person to lead us through today's session on Veeam Data Cloud for M365. So before I hand on to Mike, please kindly mute your mic to avoid disruptions. And you can also use the chat box if you have any questions. Just drop them in the chat, or and our team will actively respond to it. Also, please stay engaged. Stay engaged. We need your engagement. You can react, comment, and participate in the polls so that this session will be very lively. And also, please make sure you have a good and stable network so that you'll be able to get the best of experience. And at the end of this session, the recording will be shared to you via email. And yes, so please, with that, let's get started. Mark, over to you. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Queen. Um, Good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to meet you guys. My name's Mark Govender, like Queen mentioned. I'm one of the senior systems engineers for Veeam Software, based in South Africa, but obviously cover the Africa region. I've been now with Veeam for just over 5.5 years, and obviously very much on the technical side. So without further ado, I think we should get into it. Just a quick agenda. So we'll look at why we need to be backing up Microsoft 365 data. We'll then have a look at the backup as a service offering or SaaS backup service from Veeam. And then we'll jump into the demo center to have a look at what the application or the software actually looks like and how you'd use it. And then hopefully at the end, we should have some time for Q&A where we can answer all of your questions around that. So firstly, looking at why do you need to back up Microsoft 365 data? So, Queenie mentioned it as well. Data is basically, the life of a company. Okay. And one of the things that I've actually seen is if you look at how data is actually growing these days, it's become a very digital age. So the growth of data is very exponential. And it's typically driven by users creating it or even AI generated. So with that, Microsoft 365 has more than 2 billion new files added to it every single day. Okay. So this increase in data means that organizations need to make sure they have robust solutions for data recovery and also for lifecycle management. So getting into some reasons as to why you'd need to back up Microsoft 365. Very common, and I'll show you something that comes out of a report, but things like accidental deletion. I know I'm actually guilty of it sometimes, where you either may shift delete on an email or a document. It may be in a recycle bin for a certain amount of period, and then it gets removed permanently. So you can accidentally delete something that you may need in the future. You have things like retention policy confusions or gaps on how it's configured. And we'll actually go into that a bit more into depth, looking at what Microsoft actually provides you. Security threats, whether that's internal security threats or external security threats. Even though this is a software as a service offering from Microsoft, there is that issue of it also being attacked from a security point of view. So people trying to get in externally to maybe encrypt data so that they can ransom it, or even malicious people that, insiders, maybe departing employees, they may want to delete it or alter data from that environment. And then, of course, legal and compliance requirements. That's quite important. I'm sure all of you guys have auditors that actually look at how you protect data and treat data. So you need to be able to show that you're able to actually recover data when it does get lost or if there's some issues around it. Managing hybrid environments. So interesting enough, we have a lot of customers that still, may have a certain percentage of people running on-premise Exchange and also being able to have a certain amount of people in Microsoft 365 online. So you'd be able to actually protect both those sort of environments. And then finally, team data structure. A lot of data gets shared between teams, channels. You need to ensure that you are actually protecting it. So a couple of years ago, we actually started doing these surveys around data. I think it's been running now probably for the last four to 5 years. But this is information that was actually derived from a Veeam Cloud Protection Trends report last year. So, I mean, if you look at it, clearly it's not only cyber attacks which can cause data loss, okay? But there's a variety of things that can go wrong. Um, and I mean, you can see there's a consensus amongst software as a service administrators and also backup administrators that you have different types of issues that can actually lead to loss of data. But I mean, topping the list is obviously cybersecurity or cyber attacks. But there's other considerations like compliance. You need better restore capabilities, and also mitigating user errors are all that they actually represented in that report. So it's quite important to actually understand why you're protecting the Microsoft 365 data. Another thing that I've actually seen quite common, see if I can move forward, is a huge misconception around the data that resides in Microsoft 365. So a lot of people would actually assume that Microsoft takes care all of the data that's there. So the Microsoft 365 infrastructure or the service that they provide, but also all of the data that you actually put into it. So things that you put into OneDrive, your Exchange Online, or any SharePoint sites. The reality is that it is actually separated. So Microsoft's responsibility lies with the infrastructure itself and the uptime of that infrastructure. And they do a pretty good job with that as well. I mean, you find very little downtime around it. But they're quite explicit in explaining that the data that you actually put in there is still your responsibility. around protecting it as well as around the security of it. So now, I mean, a lot of times people might assume that it's something that's made up. But I mean, this is off the Microsoft's website. It's a Microsoft documentation that you can find online where they actually speak about the shared responsibility model for Microsoft 365 and Entra ID. Again, they will take responsibility for the uptime of the infrastructure. And of course, they would have some sort of redundancy built in to try and protect the data and the infrastructure, and also help with things like recycle bins, security. They have certain levels of security in place to make sure that that infrastructure is protected, and obviously try and follow the regulatory requirements around the data that they're actually storing as well. But your data that you actually put in there at the end of it is fully your responsibility. The access and the control to that data, the backup of it, making sure that the retention period for that data is correct as well. And of course, having a certain level of security around that data. So, as a simple example, if there was a catastrophic failure to Microsoft 365, and they will obviously try and get the platform back up and running as quickly as possible. In that process, if there is any data loss whatsoever, if you might lose some data around OneDrive or some SharePoint sites, they're not responsible for actually ensuring that the data is returned back to the platform. That would still be your responsibility. Next, I'd like to talk a bit about retention policies. So these are the default retention policies when you onboard as a tenant with them on the Microsoft 365 platform. So you can see various types of data have various types of policies around it. So for example, deleted items in the recycle bin typically would stay there for 30 days and then get permanently moved. Um, Inbox folders, they'll stay in your inbox for 2 years and then move to archive for up to maybe 5 years. But all of these different types of data can have different retention policies on the Microsoft 365 platform. Now, one that I've seen quite common amongst organizations is when an employee leaves the company. So typically, if an employee leaves, you would take their Microsoft 365 license and you, when the new person joins, create a new account and allocate that license to that new account. The old person's data will remain on the platform for 30 days and then get permanently deleted. So it's quite important to understand that you've got a copy of it and actually, maintain a copy of it outside of the Microsoft 365 platform. And of course, this is a live production environment. So if you think of it in terms of a on-premise production environment, it's always good practice to have a copy of your data or backup of your data outside of the production environment. So these retention policies shouldn't be a replacement for a backup solution because it's not intended to provide that sort of service around that. So if you look at it from a cybersecurity or cyber attack or a data compromise point of view, typically, you discover these things over 140 days. So if you line it up with the default retention policies that's available or comes with Microsoft 365, you can see you can easily lose data on the platform that you will no longer have access to. Now, don't get me wrong, there is ways of actually customizing these policies. So you can go in and actually customize the length of it. Of course, there's applicable charges for it, as well as understanding exactly how long policies or how long you've put in place for the different types of data. So again, could cause some confusion around the retention policies on Microsoft 365. So from a Veeam perspective, what we create is because it's a complete copy a of the data from Microsoft 365, and it's a specified retention period that you're going to be storing it for. Across the board, we can guarantee that you'll have access to that data for those points in time. Okay, so makes it quite easy and quite simple. So it doesn't matter what the retention policies on Microsoft 365 look like. You know that you've got 5 years or 7 years or 10 years worth of backup that you can actually access to be able to actually restore the data whenever you need to. So Again, it's your responsibility to ensure that the Microsoft 365 and Entra ID is actually protected. Something interesting, and this is a stat from Microsoft themselves, is that there's such a surge in cyber threats. So it gets to a stage where there's over 600 million attacks every day on the Entra ID infrastructure. So just quickly on Entra ID, Entra ID used to be called Microsoft Azure AD, which is the old Azure AD, but it's basically holds all of your IAMs, so your identity access management, so your users, your passwords, your administrators, and so forth. So basically, if somebody gets into that, they would have, as they say, they'll have the keys to the kingdom, because then they'll be able to access all of the different platforms that's associated with that Entra ID. So quite important that it's very secure, but more importantly, you need to actually ensure that you're actually backing it up and protecting it. Because there's various, if something does get deleted or if it does get encrypted, you're able to actually restore it and get yourself up and running as quickly as possible. So we spoke about infrastructure or the growth of the data on the infrastructure itself. But I mean, obviously, with the growth of data and more users getting added in, there's obviously infrastructure capabilities around it. So you need to make sure that you have a good backup of your Microsoft 365 data. And then from a recovery time objective and recovery point objective, you need to make sure that you have at least at a minimum daily backups of all of the data and that you're able to actually recover it as quickly as possible. So if you look at scenarios or issues without having a Microsoft 365 and Entra ID backup, you've basically got limited access to your data. And also, you kind of almost lose control of what you actually own in terms of data. There's security vulnerabilities around this. You could suffer the consequences of a ransomware attack and you'd not be able to have any data anymore. There'll be gaps in your retention policy. So again, understanding how long the data will stay on the infrastructure, if somebody leaves, if somebody deletes it. So all of that puts you at risk in terms of actually losing data. So one of the questions from our Veeam data protection report actually poses to organizations to ask them, does your organization back up the data from within Microsoft 365? So this, like I mentioned, our survey has been running for the last couple of years. So this is a look of it for the last, let's call it 5 years, going back to 2020. But in 2020, you can see that the percentage of people that use third-party backup products or backup as a service was pretty low. Moving into 22, it's jumped up to 45% of users on 365 that or organizations that started using it. And just late last year, it's jumped up all the way to 74% of organizations that are now using third-party products to actually back up those Microsoft 365 data. So the adoption of or and the understanding of why you need to back up Microsoft 365 has reached organizations, and you can definitely see the trend in actually in people protecting that data. So something we've introduced, it's now been around for just over close to 3 years, but it's something called Veeam Data Cloud for Microsoft 365, and it is a backup as a service or a SaaS or storage as a service offering to actually protect data. Okay, so it's a fully backup managed service that's provided by Veeam. So this is actually built on our software that we've now had running probably for the last 8 years. So it's definitely not new technology. And we found the on-premise version to be very successful. And we've actually converted it into a backup as a service offering. So something else we've seen from the Veeam Data Protection Trends report of last year is that there is a huge shift of organizations starting to use backup as a service. So from that report, we can see that 88% of organizations are very likely to start utilizing backup as a service within the next 2 years. So we obviously saw the need for having a backup as a service offering, and that's the reason why we came up with Veeam Data Cloud for Microsoft 365. So looking at some of the benefits of a backup service for Microsoft 365, it just becomes a very simple and a quick, easy way to be able to protect the data from Microsoft 365. It's something that we provide as an all-inclusive service, and I'll talk about that later. One of the benefits of actually doing it with the Veeam data cloud for Microsoft 365 is that we actually offer you unlimited storage. So it's simply licensed by the number of users on your tenant or on your Entra ID, and the amount of data is not taken into consideration at all. You can store as much of your backups that you'd like. The maintenance and security around it is actually provided by us. And of course, it meets all of the compliance and governance requirements around data and how you actually use it. And it's specifically tailored for Microsoft 365. So with that, there's three pillars that we kind of look at. It's agile data resiliency for Microsoft 365 and Entra ID, dynamic disaster recovery, and of course, robust security and compliance around that data. So jumping into that, agile data resiliency, it's about being able to, you know, uh, know that you've got a copy of that data sitting in your backup location, and you can easily find the files. We have something called e-discovery, where you can go in and search for the documents, emails, or whatever information you require within the backup set to actually find it quite quickly and actually provide it or restore it back into production. Because it's sitting in a isolated environment, encrypted as well as in an immutable fashion, you can actually use this data for forensic investigations because you'll have a point in time copy of your Entra ID sitting in a backup configuration as well. And of course, you can pre-configure schedule backups at regular intervals to ensure that the data is consistently protected. So you can store all of your data on Microsoft 365 in the cloud region of your choice. So even when you do the onboarding process for Veeam Data Cloud for Microsoft 365, you have various options on the regions in terms of countries where you can actually store the data in. We pretty much align with Microsoft Azure data centers as it's based on that. So any country where there's an Azure data center, you'd be able to leverage as a location to store all of your backup files. We can do customizable backup schedules if you need. And of course, we give you granular restore options. So whether that's file level attributes, you could actually just restore a single document, a single contact back into the production environment if you need to. And then you'd able to quickly identify inconsistencies by comparing your Entra ID tenant. So, like I mentioned earlier, sometimes if somebody did get into Entra ID, and we're able to make some changes, or even if it's an administrator that may have made some changes to some service principles, it's sometimes difficult to determine what's changed. So with the Veeam Data Cloud for Microsoft Entra ID, you're able to actually compare your latest restore point to your live production environment, and it'll actually show you what's been changed and what's different between the two. So making it quite easy to troubleshoot and restore the correct data. Then from robust security and compliance. So one of the big things, and I mentioned earlier, is that you don't need to worry about and manage any separate costings around storage because it's actually included and it's unlimited. It's a simple web interface that you log into. Once the onboarding process is complete, you can log in, create your backup job, and you'd be able to get it up and running probably within 30 to 40 minutes, and you'd be able to start backing it up. Security, very important. So we've got global security certifications around the data centers and the information, but also there's encryption, multi-factor authentication, and also advanced role-based access that you can actually set up within the environment. So like I mentioned, everything is included. So if we look up on the left here, these are typical components that you would generally have to provide from your infrastructure, like a management server, proxies maybe to retrieve the data, storage to store your backups. But all of that is actually provided by Veeam and it's managed by Veeam as well. So the network infrastructure, but more importantly, the updates and patching. So all of your security updates, any patching on the operating system or the application, that's actually provided and done by us. From a user perspective for an organization, you would typically be uh, required to log in, create your backup jobs, and of course, do restores. Like I mentioned, it's got an e-discovery built into it, so it becomes quite easy to find any files or documents within it. But something else that's actually quite nice is it includes a self-service restore portal, which means your users can actually log in and restore their own data. So it uses Microsoft single sign-on, so they will still use that same process to log into this infrastructure, and their own email or Exchange Online, their OneDrive, and any personal SharePoint sites they have will be available for them to actually restore. So they can only be able to restore back into the Microsoft 365 platform. Then finally, security. So, like I mentioned, we've got some global security certifications around the Veeam Data Cloud for Microsoft 365 and Entra ID. Data sovereignty talks to about the region that you'd like your data to be stored to. So it's a storage account that you choose. The data is always encrypted. So when we're retrieving it from the Microsoft 365 platform and transporting it through to the backup repository, it will be in an encrypted state, as well as when it's in the backup repository itself, it'll be encrypted. This is an isolated environment that it's built around, so it is totally decoupled from Microsoft 365 infrastructure, as well as Microsoft Azure, as well as your infrastructure as well. We do get a third-party company that comes in once a quarter to actually do uh, pen testing or penetration testing. And of course, from that, they ensure that this infrastructure and the user interface and the components used are actually still secure and cannot be penetrated. But like I mentioned, we use MFA. So even as an administrator, when you log into the web interface to start doing management, you would need to follow that multi-factor authentication process in order to access it. And like I mentioned, immutability. So once the data is in the backup repository, it will be immutable, which means that it cannot be altered or deleted or changed by anybody. And that actually includes administrators from your tenant. It includes any of your users. At no stage will they actually have the ability to be able to delete any backups or restore points from the platform itself. So when you do an onboarding process, one of the requirements is that you would need to tell them the storage region that you'd like to have your backup files stored in, and also how long you'd like to keep your backup files. So by default, we typically do 7 years, but you actually have the ability to customize that up for up to 25 years. Now, if you choose to have, for example, your backup stored for 10 years, it will be immutable for those 10 full years as well. Okay. So it's very secure and cannot be changed. And of course, we do leverage hardware redundancy at a storage level. Uh, you know, just having 3 copies of the data, your backup files, so that if something does go wrong, we're still able to actually bring the data back online for you. So, like I mentioned, Microsoft 365 is continually growing, and Veeam's actually is the number one backup vendor for Microsoft 365. And I mean, they've got around 400 million seats or 320 million active team users. And currently, we protect just over 20, 23 million of those Microsoft 365 users. So we're probably the largest, or we are actually the largest backup vendor on the Microsoft 365 platform. Now, I mean, to give you an idea, this is a long-term alliance and partnership that we've been running with them. It's been running for the last 15 years. I mean, you can see we achieved gold partnership back in 2010. We're one of the first vendors to be actually team certified. So we were one of the first backup vendors that were able to actually go in and start protecting teams' data. And when Microsoft actually did launch their own backup storage in November in 2023, we were actually one of the launch partners, and we able to actually leverage their backup storage as well as to create a point in time copy if we need to. So without further ado, I think I'm going to jump into the demo center, and then we can have a look at what the software looks like, and thereafter we will have some time for Q&A. Give me one sec. Okay, so hopefully you guys can still see this screen, but let's go quickly copy this. So like I mentioned, it's a full-on backup as a service offering. So you typically would access it using a browser and have access to the URL. You will also typically log in using your Microsoft 365 credentials. So if you're a user, then you'll just have access to the self-service portal. But if you're an administrator, then you'd be able to have a view of all of the backup jobs and the entire tenant. So I'm going to quickly, sorry, I think it was just sitting there too long. Okay, so when you log into the Veeam Data Cloud user interface, you can see you're provided with the infrastructure or a dashboard that shows the different types of infrastructure you're protecting. So currently we have the ability to protect Microsoft 365, Entra ID, Salesforce, and Vault is a storage as a service offering that we provide. But today we're going to be looking at 365 and Entra ID. So I'm just going to quickly jump into manage the 365 backup. So far you can see it's very simple, very intuitive to log in and actually get access to it. So once you've completed the onboarding process using that wizard, you'll then see your tenant here, and you can just simply click on manage to access that. So once you log in here, you've presented with the set of dashboards. So the first dashboard is around the amount of accounts that's protected. So you can see the number of accounts and the number of licenses that will be allocated. But just to highlight, you'll see here that there's 12 that there's no license required. So if you want to back up any shared mailboxes or public mailboxes, you still would be able to protect it with Veeam Data Cloud for Microsoft 365. However, it will not consume a license from Veeam because it's also unlicensed on the Microsoft 365 platform. The second dashboard just shows you your storage consumption, your backup storage consumption. Down here, you'll see your top 5 storage users on the Microsoft 365 environment. Because of our connectivity to it, this is up-to-date information that it's actually providing around the storage that's being consumed by your users. And of course, your license activity on the Microsoft 365 platform again. So this is the number of active users that you actually have on the Microsoft 365. Okay, so like I mentioned, if once you do the onboarding process to create a backup job, very simple. You come down to backup policies, you say add policy. I'm going to do a flex, going to give it a name and a description if you want. So here you can see the storage region you'll be using. Being a demo center, it's set up in the US, so it's US Central. And then you can choose what to back up. You back up the entire organization, but it might not necessarily be the best idea for your environment. You can go in and actually choose. So you can go in and choose your users, and this is obviously based on all of the users that are in the Microsoft 365 tenant. But you can also go in and choose what to back up for them. So you can select, or maybe you choose to create a backup job where you just want to back up their um, mailbox, and then you'll do a second job where you back up the archive. and then another for OneDrive. You can actually choose granularly what you're going to put into the job. If you leverage Microsoft 365 groups as well, again, these will come up. And from a group perspective, you can choose whether what to protect for the member from that group, but also the group itself. So you could just create a job where you're protecting the group mailbox and any SharePoint sites associated with it. Similarly, for SharePoint sites and teams, again, whatever exists on your tenant will actually get populated into this list, and you select what you'd like to actually add into the job. So it becomes pretty straightforward and easy. If you want, you could simply just create five mail file sorry five backup policies. One backup policy that backs up everybody's mailbox, and then another for the archive, another for OneDrive, another for Teams, and another for the SharePoint site. And then you'll just have five jobs that are actually listed. Once it's there, you hit create. I'm not going to create it, but it'll come up in this list of all of the policies that's actually been set up. So the nice thing with this is that if I highlight a policy, it shows me the sessions that it's been running. I can highlight a session and I can go in and actually have a look at the details around that sessions. So I can see there were 78 objects that was found, 6 was excluded, but this is a list of the objects. And of course, if there's any warnings or errors, I'll actually see for that particular item what is a warning. So for example, on this completed with some cannot protect a group out of that Teams channel. So it makes it quite easy to identify what issue you have. You can export these, so you can download these sessions if you need to, but you can also get it emailed as a report. But then another nice thing is if you want to start it, all of these jobs are on demand. So you can schedule it, but once you highlight it, you can actually start it. So if somebody's maybe going to make a change to a SharePoint site, before they do that, it would be good if you can come in here and then quickly back up that SharePoint site and then allow them to make those changes. So pretty straightforward and easy. From a restore perspective, also, it's an explorer that we've built into this web interface, which allows you to explore your restore points and restore data from there. So for example, I can go into a particular restore point and highlight it. So you can see this job's now been running multiple times during the day. So I can go back to that point in time and actually mount that restore point, and it'll actually bring it up for and allow me to explore it. So once it's up, this is Outlook that I'm currently exploring. I can highlight a user. Let's take John Snow, and I can restore the entire mailbox. Simply click on restore, and I'll get various restore options that'll come up. I can restore back to the original location. I could also restore to another user's mailbox as a folder if I want, or I could actually download this backup as a PST file on premise. So you've got various options around this. And the reason for this is because I'm logged in as an administrator. If I was logged in as a user, I would only be able to actually restore back to the original location and nowhere else. So I can do that for an entire mailbox, but if I jump into it, or I can do it for a single folder and I'll have the same restore options, or I could actually just simply restore a single email if I need to as well. I could do a calendar entry. If I can find his calendar. Here we go. So if there's any calendar entries that may have gotten deleted, you can restore it. Or even if a single contact got deleted out of his list, you'd be able to go in and actually select it and restore it. So we have a very similar approach for OneDrive. Again, it'll mount the restore point together with the users, and then you'd be able to go in, restore a selected OneDrive. Again, being administrator, I could do it to the original location, or I'd be able to do it to another user's OneDrive or download it as a zip folder as well. But if I'm just looking for a single item, maybe a folder or even just a document, I can go into the folders and just restore that single item. So pretty straightforward and easy to actually do. Similarly, SharePoint will obviously just show you a list of all of the SharePoint sites, but you can also drill down into them and actually restore um, data from within those SharePoint sites. So if you go into content, you'd be able to actually see the documents or libraries that actually exist there, and you'd be able to actually delete those, restore that back into SharePoint. The same would apply to Teams. Teams would allow you to restore the entire channel back, or you could actually just restore data for that particular channel back into the production environment. So pretty straightforward, very easy. The nice thing is that all of this, when you do it, actually generates an activity. So as an administrator, you'd be able to actually see when a user does their own restore, or you'll get an alert for it. And you can push this alerts to either email or to a syslog server, or you could actually send it to a Teams channel if you need to as well. Another nice function is that it does have reporting built in. So if you need to generate reports on demand, you can come in and do reports around mailboxes, users, maybe a backup summary for a month, or a detailed backup report. The nice thing is, if an auditor comes and asks you, did you run backups for, let's say, last year, June? I can come here and actually choose that period of time and generate a report for it. And you'd be able to send it off to them. You can also schedule reports. So pretty straightforward. You'll go through I'll just edit this, a wizard. You'll choose the report type, give it a name, choose the frequency. So whether that's daily, weekly, monthly, and of course, add in email addresses of the people that would actually receive it. So pretty straightforward and easy. And of course, once that schedule's configured, it'll automatically run, and you'd be able to get those reports in your mailbox. So earlier when I spoke about e-discovery, so this is actually the part of the search functionality. So we've got a basic search functionality where you can go and search for documents and items within Outlook, OneDrive, SharePoint. Um, you'll obviously select the location of it. So if it's Outlook, it'll be one of the user's Outlook. And then you just simply type a keyword that you'd be searching on. However, if you have, sometimes you may need to find something that you're not 100% sure what it was about, or if a user doesn't have all of the information, but they can tell you it was in Outlook, it came from somebody named John, it was something about finance. So you can use that multiple criteria to actually discover that. So whether you search on sender's address, the subject, or just add in a value that you can actually include into the search criteria, and that'll actually allow you to kind of find the documents sitting in the backup files. Like I mentioned, there's obviously notifications, and these notifications can be pushed through to Teams channel, or it can be pushed through uh, into emails that you can actually receive. So that's Microsoft 365. I just want to quickly jump into the Entra ID. I know I'm not going to have much time left for questions, but I'm going to try and at least save 5 or 6 minutes for it. So again, very simple process. You'll onboard as an Entra ID tenant. And of course, once it's in there, you'd be able to actually manage it. So Entra ID, like I mentioned, is about all of the objects in terms of users, service principals, application IDs that exist for authentication. But another big part of it is actually Entra logs. Okay, but I'll show you what that looks like. So when you log in, it shows you the protection status and of course the objects that are being protected as well. So all of the roles that were created, users, application IDs, and so forth. And of course your restore sessions. So if you need to see what your backups look like, you go into objects and you can see, you'll see the list of all of the users on the first column. You can select multiple users in order to restore them. But if you select just one user, then you can do a compare and restore. So when it does that, it looks at what's changed for that user in terms of any attributes, and of course, permissions will be part of it. And you'll be able to compare what's changed between your backup file or your restore point versus what's in the current production environment. We do the same for groups. So if you created groups and you've got a list of users in there, or whether they security groups or 365 groups, then you'd be able to actually restore that and compare as well. The same would apply to administrative units and roles. But a big thing that's used these days is your application service principles. So this is your application IDs, and these are typically created in order to give applications permissions. Okay, so a lot of times these have certain level of roles attached to them as well. So if somebody makes a change to this application ID, it could actually affect your production applications and so forth. So it makes it quite easy when you can do things like compare and restore, because then you can see exactly what's changed on this application ID and then just make the restore back for that particular attribute. Another big focus for me on Entra ID is logs. Okay, so Entra ID logs carries audit logs as well as your sign-in logs. Now, an interesting thing about this is Microsoft doesn't store these logs forever. They only keep up to 30 days. And after 30 days, it's rolling and deletes the oldest set of logs. Now, if you have some sort of compromise that happen on Entra ID, but you only find it out after 32 days, you will not be able to provide logs to investigators in order to understand, where they got in and so forth. It's quite important to actually have a backup of these sign-in logs, because then if something does get found out, whether it's 60 days later or 120 days later, you'd be able to go back in time and actually select. Okay, sorry, this was only started this year, but you'd be able to go back in time and be able to look for those logs at that particular time to understand when it was actually compromised. So again, shows you the activity around backup sessions and restore sessions, but these are typically carried out by backup or administrators in the environment and not users at all. But you'd still be able to see, what sort of details around what was actually restored back into the environment as well. So that's me. I know we've got 8 minutes left, so I hope that would probably be sufficient time for any questions or any comments, anything anybody wants to ask.
Thank you very much. Thank you very
Sure.
much, Mark. Thank you for the session. So, have gained more insight from the session, and I hope that you all got the value and insight you need to understand the importance of backup and why we are holding the session today. So, before the Q&A, just so we are all on the same page quickly, here are some key insights we have learned today. So we now know that M365 has basic retention policies, but it's not like a full backup. Data can still be lost through deletions, as Mark mentioned, corruption or security incidents. And it is your responsibility to get a proper backup in place. Also, we now know that it gives full coverage for all M365 workloads. So Veeam Data Cloud protects not just Exchange, but also OneDrive, SharePoint Teams, and even your Entra ID as Mark has shown. So that is one of the most comprehensive modern SaaS backup we have. So having a backup service that covers all those workloads means fewer weak points and where data loss can happen. So we now also know that retention, recovery, and restore strategy are very, very essential. It's not enough to just backup. You need a proper retention settings. So that is how long you keep backups. So you need the regular testing of restores and the ability to do both granular, that is single file or item, and bulk recovery, that is either you many files or some full services. So without that, you are vulnerable. Also, this webinar showed us some benefits of having a proper backup for your M365. And to list them, it gives you a quick and easy setup, unlimited storage, saves times and money, which businesses are very, very particular about. So this has also shown us why partial backup is very risky. So when you have partial backup or infrequent backups, it leaves gaps and data can be deleted outside retention windows and it can be restored. So a partial backup might give you false confidence but still leave your business exposed. And here are just some next steps you should consider taking. You should kindly do an assessment of your M365 backup today. Know exactly why you're covered, what is covered, and what isn't. You should also identify risk. Think about what will happen if maybe you lost key files or key emails, maybe they were accidentally deleted. Also, please let's put it in at the back of our mind to plan your recovery strategy. Define how quickly your businesses should be able to bounce back, and you can request the demo to see how it works fully. So, also, if you have a backup properly deployed and working, we will say well done and congratulations. So, with this said, you can kindly ask your questions and drop your comments, which will be attended to Mark. Thank you very much. So, do we have any questions? Okay, let me check the chat box. Okay, we have one question from Mr. Isiak. He said, can Veeam backup user configuration on identity and also BitLock stored in Intune?
Um, so are you talking about Microsoft Intune, I presume? Now I'm just trying to think of the link because Entra ID should be holding the user's identity. But I mean, then they should have the permissions on it that would allow them uh, to control Intune. Sorry, I'm not very familiar with Intune. But so I would assume that protecting it from an Entra ID point of view should have all of the permissions and attributes that was allocated to that user. So from that perspective, it will. But I will actually maybe hold on to that question and try and get a bit more clarity around its integration into Intune.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. So, I will get back to you, Mr. Isiak, via email with a full answer to that question. So, please, do we have any other questions? You can kindly raise your hand, or you can kindly raise your hand and unmute.
Queen, I've seen a hand raised. I'm not sure if you need to unmute it.
Oh, sorry. You can go ahead and unmute, Mr. Benga.
Afternoon, Mr. Govenda.
Yes.
Okay, so my name is Benga Ologun. I'm the ICT manager for Ikoyi Club 1938. Apology, I actually planned to join the meeting at the starting time, but there was an emergency meeting that I ran into. Though the last part that what you are talking about when I joined was about backups. Though
Yes.
I didn't start the backup side, but I'm interested in this backup. So sometime last 2 weeks ago, then I was at a conference where they stay telling me I need the second level backups. So on this 365, are we saying we can also do another backup on the 365 that will cost us nothing? Or are we saying we're going to have another backup outside the M365, that we must have, since there's tendency that data can be lost?
Yeah, 100%. So with our solution, Veeam Data Cloud for Microsoft 365, it would be a complete backup of Exchange Online, OneDrive for the users, SharePoint site, and team structured data. And you can also include Entra ID, but it will be a backup of it outside of the Microsoft 365 platform. So if something happens to the platform, you would still have your backups that you could access and also recover from when the platform comes back up online. So we do also integrate into Microsoft's, let me actually use the screen, but we integrate into Microsoft's storage backup, as they call it. And that's where you actually see that we can do a point in time backup, but that point in time backup will exist in the Microsoft 365 platform. So under backup policies, if I add new, there's a new Express, and this is based on our integration into Microsoft backup policy. This is a storage point in time snapshot that exists on the Microsoft 365 platform of all of the users' data, SharePoint sites, and OneDrive. It at the moment does not support Teams. But if you use the Veeam backup policy, then this would actually take it out of the Microsoft 365 platform and store it in a different location. I hope that answers your question, Mr.
Okay, that is fine. I hope this can also back up data on Microsoft Dynamics that are also run presently.
No, Microsoft Dynamics currently isn't supported by this platform. It is something that our product team is actually working with, but currently this is specifically for Microsoft 365 and Microsoft Entra ID.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much for that question, Mr. Binga. Thank you, Mark. So do we have any other questions? Any other hands raised? Okay. No hands raised means no questions. Let me quickly check the Q&A session. Okay, yeah, so we have a question from Mr. Fred Osim. He said, for an organization like ours that relies heavily on the entire M365 stack, e.g., Exchange, Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive, and even Power Automate driven forms, what are the specific, often overlooked gaps in the partial backup provided by Microsoft native retention policies for these interconnected services? For instance, if a Power Automate driven forms with the information it has is deleted, what components beyond the form might we permanently lose that a comprehensive backup like Veeam would protect? Did you get a question, Mark?
Yes, I did. Okay,
Okay.
so yeah, so Power Forms at the moment is something that's not part of it. The Veeam Data Cloud for Microsoft 365 is specifically around um, the Exchange Online, SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams. But from what I understand, a lot of the Power Forms data actually exists within some of your SharePoint sites. So it technically the data that belongs to those Power Automated driven forms would actually be protected, but the configuration of it currently wouldn't. But that is a valid point. But I mean, the gap is again, our product team is actually looking at it, and hopefully in the future we will actually see the configuration of those forms being included in the protection as well.
Okay. Thank you very
Thanks.
much, Mr. Fred. Does that answer your questions? You can just type if you want to, or you can unmute. Thank you very much. Yes, okay. He said yes, it does. Thank you very much, Mr. Fred. Thank you, Mark. Okay, do
Sure.
we have any other questions? Okay, nothing from the chat and nothing in the Q&A session. Okay. Okay, then I think that is all for today. That's all the questions we will be answering. Thank you. Okay, thank you. I
Thank you,
hope those
everybody.
insights will get implemented in your businesses. So before you leave, quickly, there's a form sent to the chat box. Kindly fill out the short feedback form as it helps us improve in our future sessions. And also, as that is happening, I'd just like to mention a bit about our subsidiary. Kindly permit me to share my screen.
Yeah, you can go for it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Can you all see my screen?
Yes,
So
it's up.
yes, thank you. So as some of you might know, Ha-Shem has a development and training part of our ecosystem, and that is our Ha-Shem Academy. So it's a training institute for tech and non-tech fields. If you're looking to upskill, get into tech, get certifications like Microsoft 365 Administrator, Microsoft 365 Certified, and so on, Ha-Shem Academy is the place for you. So to get more, to learn or get started, you can kindly send an email to training@hashem.com. Training@hashem.com. So, yes, thank you for your participation, for your time and input. We really appreciate you all today. I know it's like a lot of us has been very, very busy, but I still thank you for being here today. So kindly follow us on our social media platform, yes, as the links is shared in the chat box. So that brings us to the end of today's session, everyone. Thank you for filling the forms, and bye. We'll call it a day. Have a nice and productive rest of the day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Cheers.
Bye.